I've already introduced you to the setup of the gradebook and a little bit about the gradebook. In this video, we're going to talk about how do we get grades into our gradebook. How do we add them within Blackboard so that I start seeing more columns here. There are two ways of adding grade columns into your gradebook. One of those is to actually add an assignment or an exam or a quiz in Blackboard, and once you do that, it will add that column automatically into the gradebook. Another method is to add the grades directly in, or add a grade column directly in the grade center, and we'll talk about why that's the case. But let's first go to course content, and what I'm going to do here, instead of creating a whole new folder or do anything, I'm just going to add something to the bottom of this course folder, and I will eventually delete it, but I'm going to add an assignment. And so I'm going to add an assignment here. I'm not going to call it much. I'm just going to call it ZZZ. Hopefully that's not to put you to sleep, but ZZZ here, just so that we can see that that will show up in the grade column. And I'm going to have a due date at, let's make it tomorrow, and let's make it worth 10 points, and let's just hit submit. Okay, so I have an assignment here, ZZZ, and obviously there's not much to it, but if I go to the grade center and I move my bar over, I can see there is the grade column. I now have a grade column, and because I assigned the points, you can see that over here, you're going to look over here when I put my mouse over the ZZZ, it's worth 10 points, for instance. Now at this point I can also manipulate this column in a number of different ways. We'll get to that in a future lecture here. But I have my column, and so that's going to be already created. Now we might want to move this column around, and again that's going to be in a subsequent video, but it's here in the gradebook. Okay, now that we're here, I also have another method for adding a column. Now the reason why you might want to add that column varies. You might want to have a calculating column, or add something where you're entering grades directly. But if you're planning on adding an assignment or a discussion or a test or something that they're actually going to do in Blackboard, don't add the column directly. Instead, add the assignment, add the test, add the discussion, and it will add it for you. But let's say that you're giving a paper test and then you want to add those grades into Blackboard. Well, in this case you would want to add a column from the grade center, grade your test, and then add the grades into Blackboard. So let's do that, and we can do that a number of different ways. I can simply just create a column. Now create columns are where I can add things about the column that are going to reference, say, an external assignment or test. But I can also add columns that will do calculations, things that will, like an average column or a total column. We'll get to those in just a second. But let's create a column. Alright, so let's just create a scenario for ourselves. We have just given exam 3 as a take-home test or a paper test, and you've graded it, and you now need to enter it into Blackboard. Let's create that test. This is we're going to call it exam number 3, and we can actually name it something else in the grade center, but I'm just going to call it exam exam 3 without the number, just so you see how it shows up here. I can add a description, but again, that's not something the students are going to see. I can do a primary score. Now in this case I can decide to show them initially, so the primary display is what the students are going to see first. And usually what this means is that this is what the students will see. The secondary display can be a secondary way of displaying a grade, but usually only you will see this. For instance, it might be that you want the score to display and then you do a percentage. Right? This is typical. Let's say you're giving a test that's worth, say, 70 points. You want to see this. You want them to see the score out of 70 points, but you also want to see what percentage that is. So maybe 59 points. You don't know what that means right off the top of your head. If you by clicking on percentage,
it will show you what that is in percentage out of 70 points. I'll show you this in just a moment. I'll enter a grade and I'll show it to you. I can also change categories. We're not there yet with regards to how we assign categories, but in this case I can use one of the default categories, test. Let's make it out of 70 points. Right? I can add a rubric and things like that, but I have created a column that I'm telling Blackboard that is exam 3, that it's worth 70 points. The first score should be the actual score of the exam, and then there's a percentage that it'll show me. And I can also do a due date, but that's not necessary in this case because this is a test that they took on a paper as a paper test, and you've graded it. I'm including it in the grade column, and the students can see it. You can also show statistics here if you want them to see, for instance, class average and things like that. That's certainly up to you. I'm going to hit submit. I'm going to go over here, and I can see now exam 3. I'm going to enter in the score. Let's say that I was a mediocre student. I got a 55 out of this. And you can see that it's given me the score, 55, but it's also given me a percentage, 78.5 or 0.6. So it's showing me the percentage of that score as well. And that's what I meant by there's a primary display and there's a secondary display. And normally the students will only see that primary display. So you actually can turn it into they only see the percentage. I can go here and edit the column information. And I can switch that around if I want. I can have them see the percentage, and then the secondary score is the score here. And by doing that, I would see the percentage first. And I can go and click on this. In this case, though, the primary score, you're going to have to enter the percentage. And this is why you don't do the percentage first, usually, unless you have your grade calculated as a percentage. So anyway, you can manipulate that however you want. I personally would use the score as the primary display and the percentage as the secondary display. Okay, so we have two methods for getting these columns in here. The last thing I want to show you is that if I create a calculated column, let's say I use an average column, you're going to have a few more things to consider when making this column. So first off, I might call this the class average, or not the class average, course grade, there we go. Because this is going to only show for individual students. And as I go down, I can again change the primary display. So maybe in this case I just want to make it a percentage. And now I select columns. I can either select all the grade columns that are visible, or I can select columns and categories. Again, I'll cover this in a subsequent video on how to do each of these. But let's say I just want to show their grade after taking exam 4. Let's say that in this course they've taken exam 4, they've taken the lab exam, they've taken the quiz. I'm sorry, I'm using control to select multiple ones here. And in fact, I can select all of those. I will click this arrow, and these are the columns that will be included in that average. I'm going to hit submit. And you can see that there's no course grade here. So as I'm looking at this, I realize that I only included these grades, and so I need to go back and look at my grades. And I did not include ZZZ and exam 3, so I'll go ahead and add those as well. And now you can see currently I have a 78 percentage. Now, you may look at this and go, that doesn't seem right because all of these other ones are showing a blank, so that should be a 0. Well, I can change that too, and that's a little fine point, little tip. Let's go to edit column information again. And whenever you do the grades below this, there's this thing called calculate as running total. What that means, and you can see the little description here, is that if something is just got a dash and not a 0, it's going to assume that that grade is just not included in the running tally of the grade. But if I click no, it's going to assume that anything that doesn't have a grade is going to be calculated as a 0. And so that's going to change my grade pretty dramatically here. And you can see, for instance, that the course grade is now 11% because I'm missing lots of grades here.
It's going to depend upon your situation about what you want the students to see. I typically will use the no on that, and I will only include the grades that they should have already turned in at that point that I'm showing them the course grade. Anyway, again, something for you to consider when doing calculated grades. I will show you later how to organize these grades and do the grading in a more detailed way, but now you know how to add columns of information into your gradebook, whether it's something you deploy directly into Blackboard or something that you're going to add to the columns, say an exam 3 or a calculated column. I hope you found that helpful, and next time we'll talk about managing grade columns, essentially how to manipulate the columns once you have them into Blackboard.